The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silver City. As Sarah Miller stepped down from the stagecoach, her leather satchel clutched tightly against her chest. The mining town sprawled before her, a maze of weathered buildings pressed against the stark granite walls of the surrounding mountains. Unlike the romantic tales she'd read of the frontier, the reality was far grittier. Coal dust and ore residue painted every surface a dingy gray, while the constant hammering from the railroad construction at the edge of town created an irregular heartbeat. Sarah adjusted her wire-rimmed spectacles, taking in the sight of children darting between buildings like wild creatures. Their clothes were tattered, faces smudged with dirt, but it was their eyes that caught her attention. Sharp, calculating, and far too knowing for their tender years. As the new schoolteacher, she'd expected poverty, but there was something else at work here that made her skin prickle with unease. The town's mayor, William Thompson, had written glowing letters about Silver City's commitment to education, promising a newly constructed schoolhouse and eager students. Yet as Sarah made her way down the boardwalk, she saw no such building. Only saloons, boarding houses, and the massive railroad office that dominated the town square. A group of children huddled near its entrance, watching the steady stream of well-dressed railroad executives with predatory intensity. Inside the Silver City Hotel, Sarah found herself face-to-face with Elizabeth Wilson, the innkeeper's wife, whose tired eyes brightened at the sight of a new arrival. "You must be the schoolteacher," Elizabeth said, wiping her hands on her apron. "We've been waiting months for someone to take the position. Though I should warn you, the last 3 didn't stay more than a week." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "There's something not right about how they're raising the children here." That evening, as Sarah unpacked her meager belongings in the small room above the hotel, she heard shouts from the street below. Peering through the grimy window, she watched as James Davis, the railroad's chief engineer, emerged from his office in a rage. "Another theft!" he bellowed, his face red beneath his elaborate mustache. "I want those street rats found." But the children he accused were already gone, vanishing into the shadows with practiced ease. The next morning, Sarah's first attempt to gather her potential students in the empty storefront that was to serve as a classroom was met with surprising resistance. The children arrived in small groups, led by older boys who eyed her with open hostility. Thomas Miller, a lanky youth of perhaps 14, seemed to be their unofficial leader. "We ain't got no use for reading," he declared, though Sarah caught the flicker of longing in his eyes as he glanced at the books she'd arranged on the rough wooden table. Mayor Thompson's office was a study in contrasts. Fine leather furniture and oriental rugs set against bare wooden walls. The man himself matched his surroundings, wearing an expensive Eastern suit that couldn't quite hide his frontier roughness. "My dear Miss Miller," he said, not looking up from his ledger, "surely you understand that these children need practical skills more than poetry. Silver City is a growing town, thanks to the railroad. Progress requires adaptable youth." It was Jake Johnson, the gruff blacksmith, who finally opened Sarah's eyes to the truth. She'd gone to him about fixing the broken lock on her classroom door, but his words stopped her cold. "Them kids ain't just running wild, miss. They're being trained. Mayor's got himself a nice little operation. Children can slip in and out of places grown men can't. Railroad men carry fat wallets, and they never suspect the little ones." Sarah spent that night pacing her room, her mind racing. The scattered pieces were falling into place. The mayor's insistence on practical skills, the children's organized behavior, the mysterious disappearance of previous teachers. Silver City wasn't lacking education because of poverty or frontier conditions. The town's leadership was deliberately keeping these children illiterate, turning them into a skilled force of thieves to profit from the railroad's expansion. In the pale light of dawn, Sarah made her decision. If Mayor Thompson wanted these children to learn practical skills, she would oblige him, but on her own terms. She began planning lessons that would combine reading and writing with observation, mathematics with sleight of hand. She would teach these children, but not just their letters. She would teach them how to use their hard-won skills to escape the fate that had been chosen for them. Sarah laid out her new curriculum in meticulous detail, knowing she'd need to be careful not to alert Mayor Thompson to her true intentions. The schoolhouse, perched on the rocky slope overlooking Silver City's bustling mining district, would become her fortress of subtle rebellion. Through the cracked window panes, she could see the railroad construction crews in the valley below, their hammers striking rhythmically against the steel rails that would soon connect this isolated mountain town to the wider world. She began with Elizabeth, the oldest of her students at 12, who showed a natural talent for mathematics. Under the guise of teaching inventory management, Sarah helped the girl understand how the mayor's ledgers revealed his criminal enterprise. Elizabeth's quick mind grasped the patterns in the numbers, how stolen goods transformed into legitimate profits through careful bookkeeping deception. Together, they created a secret cipher, disguising their findings in what appeared to be simple arithmetic exercises. The younger children required a different approach. 8-year-old William had the fastest hands Sarah had ever seen, but his skills had been twisted toward picking pockets. She redirected his dexterity to writing, showing him how the fluid motion of penmanship could be just as satisfying as lifting wallets. Soon he was crafting perfect letters, his pride in legitimate accomplishment beginning to outweigh the thrill of theft. In the afternoons, when the mountain air grew thick with coal dust from the mines, Sarah taught what she called observation exercises. The children would practice reading not just words, but people, noting the way honest folk carried themselves versus those with ill intent. Young Thomas proved especially adept, his keen eyes catching details that even Sarah missed. She helped him understand that this gift could protect rather than exploit. The transformation wasn't without its dangers. Catherine, the local seamstress who had befriended Sarah, warned her one evening about unusual movement around the schoolhouse after dark. "Thompson's men," she whispered, mending a tear in Sarah's shawl. "They're watching you closer than before." Sarah nodded, understanding that her subtle changes hadn't gone unnoticed. But she had anticipated this, having already taught her students to maintain their pickpocket personas whenever the mayor's associates were present. As autumn painted the mountain slopes in brilliant gold, Sarah introduced more complex lessons. James, a quiet boy with a gift for numbers, helped her create a map of the mayor's operation, marking drop points, fence locations, and the routes his men used to move stolen goods. The children treated it like a game, never realizing they were building evidence that could bring down Thompson's entire enterprise. The railroad's influence grew stronger with each passing week. New faces appeared in Silver City daily, not just rough-handed laborers, but merchants, bankers, and even a circuit judge who took up residence in the newly constructed courthouse. Sarah watched these arrivals carefully, evaluating potential allies while teaching her students to recognize the difference between authority figures they could trust and those in Thompson's pocket. One crisp morning, as Sarah wrote out the day's lessons, she noticed Elizabeth passing a note to Mary, another of her older students. Instead of confiscating it, she pretended not to see, but later found it contained a detailed account of one of Thompson's men discussing a planned robbery of the railroad payroll. Her students weren't just learning, they were becoming her eyes and ears throughout Silver City, gathering intelligence that could finally expose the corruption at the town's heart. The mayor's weekly visits to the schoolhouse took on a tenser atmosphere. Thompson would stroll between the desks, his silver watch chain glinting, asking the children to demonstrate their practical skills. Sarah had prepared them well. They showed just enough of their old talents to maintain the facade while concealing their true education. Each successful deception felt like a small victory in their quiet rebellion against Silver City's criminal establishment. Sarah knew she needed more concrete evidence of Thompson's criminal enterprise to protect her students and expose the truth. Late one evening, while grading papers by lamplight, she heard the distant echo of pickaxes from the silver mines that honeycombed the mountains around Silver City. The steady rhythm reminded her of the ticking clock they were racing against. Soon the railroad would reach their isolated valley, bringing with it opportunities for both progress and exploitation. Through careful observation, she had noticed Thompson's lieutenants meeting regularly at the abandoned mining office on the edge of town. Elizabeth, her most capable student, had overheard fragments of conversation about documentation being stored there. Sarah realized that breaking into that office might give her the proof she needed, but it would require using the very skills she was trying to help her students unlearn. The next day, Sarah began giving special assignments to her most trusted pupils. Mary would keep watch near Thompson's office, tracking his movements. William, a quiet boy with sharp eyes, was stationed near the mining office to note who came and went. She wove these surveillance tasks into their regular lessons about observation and record-keeping, building a network of young informants who thought they were simply completing their schoolwork. Sarah Miller stood at her classroom window, watching the mountain peaks fade into dusk as another disappointing day drew to a close. 3 weeks into her position as Silver City's first schoolteacher, and her students were proving to be far more challenging than she'd anticipated. Not due to any lack of intelligence, quite the contrary. These children displayed an almost unnatural dexterity and cunning that made her increasingly uneasy. Just today, she'd caught young William Thompson Jr. practicing sleight of hand beneath his desk instead of arithmetic. The railroad's arrival 6 months ago had brought an influx of workers and their families to the mining town, swelling its population with children in desperate need of education. But something wasn't right about the way Mayor James Wilson seemed to take a peculiar interest in certain students, especially those from the poorest families. She'd seen him speaking with them in hushed tones behind the general store, pressing coins into small hands before hurrying away. Sarah gathered her shawl against the mountain chill and began her walk home, mind churning with suspicion. The newly laid track gleamed in the fading light, cutting through the valley like a steel serpent. Construction crews still labored at the western terminus, where the line would eventually connect Silver City's rich mineral deposits to markets in Fort Worth. But lately there had been a rash of mysterious accidents and theft at the rail yard, delaying progress. Thomas Davis, the site foreman, had confided in Sarah during Sunday services that tools and equipment kept vanishing, despite hiring extra guards. She'd dismissed it initially, but now she recalled seeing some of her students practicing unusual climbing and balancing games during recess, scaling walls, and jumping between rooftops with disturbing skill. The kind of abilities that might prove useful for more nefarious purposes under cover of darkness. The truth struck her with sudden clarity as she passed the mayor's mansion on the hill. Through the gas-lit windows, she glimpsed several of her students being ushered into his study, including Emma Thompson and Jake Johnson, two of her brightest pupils. But instead of books, Mayor Wilson appeared to be demonstrating something with a pocket watch and handkerchief. Sarah pressed herself against the iron fence, straining to see more. "Evening, Miss Miller." The voice behind her made her jump. Samuel Thompson, Emma's father and one of the few honest deputies left in Silver City, tipped his hat. "Might want to be careful about showing too much interest in the mayor's extracurricular activities. Man's got friends in low places." His tired eyes held a warning she couldn't quite decipher. Before she could respond, he melted back into the shadows between the gas lamps. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She paced her small room above the mercantile, connecting pieces of a terrible puzzle. The mayor was using the school as cover, identifying clever children from struggling families and recruiting them into some kind of criminal enterprise. The timing of the railroad's arrival was no coincidence. With wealthy passengers and cargo soon to flow through Silver City, he was building his own army of young thieves. The next morning, Sarah arrived early to find Catherine Davis, the banker's wife, waiting outside the schoolhouse. "Miss Miller, I hope you'll accept this donation for school supplies," she said loudly, pressing an envelope into Sarah's hands. But her eyes darted meaningfully toward the contents. Inside, Sarah found a hastily scrawled note. "My husband's missing. Last seen investigating mayor's connection to rail yard thefts. Please help." Sarah's hands trembled as she tucked the envelope away. She was no longer just a school teacher. She had become an unwitting player in a dangerous game. But these were her students, and she would not stand by while their futures were stolen by a corrupt man's greed. If Mayor Wilson thought he could exploit children's talents for crime, he would soon learn that a determined teacher could be far more cunning. Over the next week, Sarah began her own careful observations. She noted which students disappeared during lunch breaks, marking their names in a hidden ledger. She memorized the patterns of movement around the mayor's mansion, the schedules of his various visitors. Most importantly, she started teaching her students new lessons, not just reading and arithmetic, but subtle ways to resist manipulation, to question authority, to recognize right from wrong. Mary Johnson, Jake's older sister, and one of Sarah's former pupils, now worked as a maid in the mayor's household. She became an invaluable ally, sharing whispered intelligence about the mayor's operations during their weekly Bible study sessions. The scope of his scheme was larger than Sarah had imagined. He was training children not just as pickpockets, but as spies and saboteurs to undermine rival railroad interests. The final piece fell into place when Elizabeth Wilson, the mayor's own daughter, stayed after class one day. With tears in her eyes, she confessed that her father kept detailed records of his criminal enterprise in a hidden safe. including evidence of Thomas Davis's fate. The man had discovered too much and paid the ultimate price. Sarah realized she would need to move carefully to avoid the same end. Deputy Thompson's warning echoed in her mind as she formulated her plan. She couldn't trust the local law enforcement. Too many were in Wilson's pocket. But she had something the mayor didn't. The loyalty of children whose minds she'd helped shape, whose potential she saw beyond mere tools for theft. And she had knowledge, not just of books and figures, but of human nature and the power of education to transform lives. As she stood again at her classroom window, watching the sun set behind the mountains, Sarah Miller knew there would be no turning back. She had come to Silver City to bring civilization through education, but now she would have to fight corruption with cunning, using her wits to protect her students and expose the truth. The real lessons were just beginning, and she intended to teach Mayor Wilson one he would never forget. Sarah's first move was subtle. She began teaching her students the art of observation and documentation during their arithmetic lessons. Under the guise of practicing their numbers, the children learned to count the men entering Wilson's office, track shipment schedules, and note patterns in the comings and goings around Silver City's bustling mining district. Young Thomas proved especially adept, his quick mind grasping both mathematics and surveillance with natural talent. The railroad's expansion had brought more than just progress to their mountain town. Behind the constant hammering and construction lay a web of land deals and displaced miners, their claims mysteriously reverting to Wilson's ownership just as the railway surveyors marked their paths. Sarah pieced this together through careful questions to her students, whose parents whispered bitter truths at home, unaware their children's new education made them perfect observers. One crisp morning, Elizabeth burst into the schoolhouse early, her face flushed with excitement. She'd overheard her father, a railroad clerk, discussing a midnight meeting at the abandoned Peterson mine. Sarah's heart raced. This could be the evidence she needed, but sending children to spy on dangerous men went against everything she believed in. She would have to find another way. The Peterson mine loomed against the mountainside like a jagged wound, its weathered timbers creaking in the wind. Sarah borrowed pants and a work shirt from Mary, the boarding house owner, and crept through the shadows as evening fell. The mine's office provided a perfect vantage point to observe without being seen. She settled in to wait, her teacher's patience serving a new purpose. As midnight approached, lanterns flickered in the distance. Mayor Wilson arrived with James Tucker, the railroad's land agent, and two armed men Sarah didn't recognize. Their voices carried clearly through the thin mountain air as they discussed their scheme. Falsified surveys, forged documents, and strong-arm tactics to force legitimate claim holders to sell. Sarah's hands trembled as she took detailed notes, her neat teacher's script recording every damning word. But education had taught Sarah more than just reading and writing. She understood the power of information, properly presented and strategically shared. The next day, she began teaching her students about the Postal Service, having them practice addressing envelopes to newspapers in Tombstone and Fort Worth. Each envelope contained carefully copied portions of her notes, along with documentation provided unwittingly by her students over the past weeks. Wilson's first inkling that his control was slipping came when Samuel, his most reliable young pickpocket, refused to work the arriving trains. Other children followed, suddenly too busy with studies to participate in his scheme. The mayor's face darkened with rage when he discovered Sarah had introduced a new history lesson focusing on famous cases of corruption exposed by education and literacy. In the evenings, Sarah met secretly with Catherine, whose husband worked for the Territorial Marshal's office in Abilene. Together, they crafted a plan to protect the children while building an ironclad case against Wilson and his conspirators. The schoolteacher's detailed records, combined with the children's innocent but accurate observations, were creating a noose that would soon tighten around the corrupt mayor's neck. The mining camps buzzed with change as parents noticed their children asking different questions, showing interest in property records and legal documents. Sarah's students began teaching their younger siblings to read, spreading literacy through the community like a quiet revolution. Knowledge, she realized, could be more powerful than any weapon in Wilson's arsenal. When the Territorial Marshal finally arrived, his evidence included not just Sarah's midnight observations, but a meticulously documented pattern of corruption revealed through the innocent eyes of schoolchildren. Wilson never understood how his carefully constructed empire crumbled, undone by the very children he'd tried to corrupt. armed with nothing more dangerous than education and truth. Sarah Miller stood at her classroom window, watching the evening sun cast long shadows across Silver City's dusty streets. 3 months of teaching had revealed the town's dark underbelly. Mayor William Thompson's systematic corruption of the children, using them as pawns in his railroad expansion scheme. Her hands trembled as she gripped the leather-bound journal containing her carefully documented evidence of the mayor's crimes. Through careful observation, she'd discovered how Thompson used the mining company's payroll shipments as cover for his real operation. The children she taught by day were being trained to pick pockets and steal documents from railroad surveyors, all while Thompson claimed the mining operations were his sole focus. The mayor's web of corruption ran deep, with even the local marshal Thomas Wilson turning a blind eye in exchange for a cut of the profits. Jake Johnson, the railroad's lead surveyor, had become Sarah's sole ally in this fight. He'd noticed missing documents and strange behaviors among the local children, but couldn't prove anything until Sarah shared her discoveries. Together, they'd spent weeks gathering evidence, watching as Thompson's young recruits practiced their craft on unsuspecting railroad workers and passengers. The situation reached a breaking point when young James Davis, barely 12, came to class with bruised ribs after failing to secure important railroad documents. Sarah's protective instincts flared as she treated his injuries, remembering her own brother's death in a mining accident years ago. Another tragedy caused by corrupt officials placing profit above human lives. Catherine Thompson, the mayor's wife, had inadvertently revealed crucial details during their weekly tea meetings. Her casual mentions of children's whereabouts and her husband's late-night meetings painted a clear picture of organized crime masked by legitimate business. Sarah had carefully noted every slip of the tongue, every inconsistency in the woman's stories. The railroad's planned route through Silver City meant millions in potential profits, but Thompson's schemes threatened to derail everything. He'd been using the children to gather intelligence on competing buyers, manipulating land prices, and sabotaging negotiations. Sarah realized that educating her students meant nothing if they remained trapped in Thompson's criminal enterprise. Using her position as the trusted schoolteacher, Sarah had methodically built relationships with each family, learning the extent of Thompson's hold over them. Many parents worked in his mines, their jobs dependent on their children's cooperation in his schemes. The web of fear and obligation made conventional justice impossible. They needed a different approach. Jake brought news that changed everything. The railroad's board of directors would arrive in 3 days to finalize land purchases. Thompson planned to use this opportunity to orchestrate his biggest theft yet, using the children to steal both documents and valuables during the welcome ceremony. Sarah knew they had to act before more young lives were ruined. Working late into the night, Sarah and Jake devised a plan that would use Thompson's own tactics against him. They recruited Elizabeth Wilson, the marshal's daughter, who had refused to participate in the mayor's schemes despite her father's pressure. Her inside knowledge proved invaluable as they prepared their countermove. The next morning, Sarah began teaching her students a new lesson, one in justice rather than theft. Through carefully worded stories and exercises, she helped them understand the difference between loyalty and manipulation, between survival and exploitation. Slowly, she saw understanding dawn in their young eyes. Thompson's own arrogance proved his undoing. Believing himself untouchable, he'd kept detailed records of his operations in his office safe. Sarah had noticed young Emma Miller, no relation but one of her brightest students, practicing the safe's combination during arithmetic lessons. The mayor's meticulous organization would become his downfall. As the sun set behind the mountains, Sarah met with Jake and Elizabeth in the abandoned mine shaft they'd chosen as their headquarters. The plan required perfect timing and the cooperation of the children, not as thieves, but as witnesses. They would turn Thompson's criminal education against him, using the very skills he'd taught to expose his crimes. The next day's events would determine not just the fate of Silver City, but the future of every child in Sarah's care. She touched the small derringer hidden in her skirt pocket, a gift from Jake, and prayed she wouldn't need it. Tomorrow would test everything she believed about education, justice, and the price of progress in the American West. Dawn broke over Silver City with an eerie red glow, the mountains casting long shadows across the empty streets. Sarah gathered her students in the schoolhouse before sunrise, their small faces illuminated by lantern light as she explained their roles. Each child would position themselves strategically around town square, ready to signal when Thompson's men made their daily rounds collecting protection money from the merchants. Emma stood at the schoolhouse window, her fingers moving unconsciously as she recited the safe combination again. Sarah placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, remembering how those same fingers had once picked pockets with frightening precision. Now, they would help unlock salvation for the entire town. Jake had spent the night securing the cooperation of honest merchants who'd suffered under Tombstone's reign, each one eager to testify once the evidence was secured. Elizabeth arrived with a wagon full of mining equipment, an ordinary site in Silver City that would serve as their cover. The children dispersed naturally through the awakening town, carrying lunch pails and books as they did every morning. But today, hidden in those pails were small mirrors, perfect for reflecting signals across the square. Sarah had taught them about light and angles, turning their mathematics lessons into tools of justice. The mayor's office stood like a fortress above the main street, its windows gleaming in the morning sun. Sarah straightened her collar and gripped her lesson book, inside which she'd hidden detailed maps of Tombstone's operation that Jake had drawn based on the children's intelligence. The derringer pressed against her thigh as she climbed the steps, her heart pounding but her face serene. Tombstone welcomed her with his usual oily charm, unaware that Emma had already slipped through the back entrance during his morning inspection of the mines. The girl moved silently in the hidden space behind his office, waiting for Sarah's signal. Their conversation about the school's funding needs dragged on deliberately, Sarah watching the clock until she saw the first flash of light from a student's mirror across the square. The sound of horses and shouting erupted outside as Tombstone's men began their daily extortion route. Sarah rose smoothly, moving to the window as if startled by the commotion. Her slight adjustment of the curtain was all Emma needed. The safe clicked open with practiced precision as Sarah kept Tombstone distracted with questions about the disturbance below. What happened next unfolded like a complex dance Sarah had choreographed through weeks of careful planning. Elizabeth's wagon accidentally blocked the street, forcing Tombstone's men to dismount. The children, appearing to scatter in fear, actually herded the townspeople into precise positions. Jake and his trusted allies emerged from the surrounding shops, weapons ready but hidden. Tombstone's face transformed from confusion to rage as Emma appeared from behind the office partition, clutching ledgers and documents that detailed years of corruption. Sarah's derringer finally emerged, steady in her hand as she backed toward the door. "Your lessons were thorough, Mayor Tombstone," she said quietly. "Perhaps too thorough. The children learned their numbers very well indeed." The confrontation exploded into chaos as Tombstone lunged for his desk drawer. Sarah's shot cracked through the air, splintering the wood near his hand. Outside, the streets erupted with activity as Jake's men surrounded Tombstone's collectors. The children's mirrors flashed in perfect coordination, momentarily blinding the criminals and allowing the townspeople to disarm them. Sarah watched as her students executed their roles flawlessly, using every skill Tombstone had taught them for theft and deception to instead restore justice. Emma appeared at her side, additional documents tucked safely in her apron. Together they descended the office steps, Sarah's educators calm, never wavering as she faced the man who had corrupted her students. The territorial marshal arrived by noon, summoned days earlier by Jake's telegraph. As Tombstone and his men were led away in chains, Sarah gathered her students in the schoolhouse. Their eyes shone with pride, not from successful theft, but from using their education to protect their town. She opened their arithmetic books, ready to begin a new chapter, one where numbers would build futures instead of destroying them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the schoolhouse windows as Sarah watched her students work diligently at their arithmetic. The events of the morning had transformed them, but not in the way Tombstone had intended. Instead of hardened young criminals, she saw determined scholars emerging, their clever minds now focused on honest pursuits. The distant sound of pickaxes from the Silver City mines provided a steady rhythm to their studies, a reminder of the honest work that built this community. Emma approached Sarah's desk with a stack of carefully preserved ledgers, evidence they'd gathered during the confrontation. "Miss Sarah, I found something else in these numbers," she whispered, her finger tracing along columns of falsified accounts. Tombstone wasn't just stealing from Silver City. He was planning to sell mining claims along the railroad's planned route through the mountains. Sarah studied the documents, her educator's mind quickly piecing together Tombstone's larger scheme. The trial of Mayor William Tombstone began on a crisp autumn morning, with Sarah Miller taking the stand first. The former schoolteacher's testimony rang through Silver City's makeshift courthouse, detailing how she had discovered the mayor's scheme to use the railroad construction as cover for training children in thievery. Her voice never wavered as she described finding ledgers hidden in the schoolhouse cellar, documenting payments received for each stolen item the children procured from incoming train passengers. Elizabeth Davis, now 13, bravely followed Sarah to the witness stand. The young girl's hands trembled as she revealed how Mayor Thompson had promised her dying mother to care for her, only to force her into his criminal enterprise. She spoke of late-night lessons in pickpocketing, practiced on mannequins in the abandoned mining office, and how the mayor threatened to send the children to work in the dangerous silver mines if they refused to cooperate. James Wilson, the railroad foreman who had helped Sarah gather evidence, testified about discovering stolen goods hidden in false-bottomed mining crates. His workers had grown suspicious when they noticed children lingering around the construction sites, supposedly selling newspapers but always somehow ending up near passengers' luggage. The pieces had finally come together when Sarah showed him the pattern in the mayor's ledgers. Samuel Miller, Sarah's brother, and the town's newly appointed deputy marshal presented the damning financial records. Years of careful bookkeeping had revealed Thompson's web of corruption, showing how he had used the children's stolen goods to finance his control over Silver City's council and law enforcement. The mining permits, railroad contracts, and even the schoolhouse deed bore the taint of his schemes. Catherine Thompson, the mayor's estranged wife, provided the final devastating testimony. She described how her husband's obsession with power had grown alongside the railroad's expansion, transforming from legitimate business interests into something far more sinister. The children's criminal training had begun as a way to gather information about wealthy passengers, but evolved into a sophisticated theft operation. Mary Wilson, the town's seamstress who had helped Sarah document the children's injuries from their dangerous assignments, brought tears to many eyes with her account of treating young ones who had been hurt while climbing aboard moving trains or scaling mining equipment to plant evidence on rival businessmen. Her testimony revealed the human cost of Thompson's greed. The jury's deliberation lasted less than an hour. As the verdict was read, Sarah stood tall beside her former students, her hand resting protectively on Thomas Davis's shoulder, Elizabeth's younger brother and one of the youngest victims of the mayor's scheme. The guilty verdict echoed through the courthouse, followed by a sentence that would ensure William Thompson spent his remaining years in territorial prison. In the aftermath, Sarah's vision for the school transformed. Working with James Wilson, she established a legitimate apprenticeship program, teaching the children real trade skills related to the railroad and mining operations. The former thieves became respected young craftsmen and women, their quick hands now building rather than stealing, their sharp minds focused on honest work rather than confident schemes. Elizabeth Davis took on a special role, becoming Sarah's assistant teacher and helping younger students overcome their past traumas. The girl who had once been Thompson's star pupil now helped others find their true calling, proving that education and opportunity could overcome even the darkest circumstances. The railroad brought new families to Silver City, and the school's reputation for rehabilitation and excellence grew throughout the territory. Samuel Miller's position as deputy marshal evolved to focus on child welfare throughout the region. Other towns sought his counsel on establishing programs to prevent exploitation of young people amid the rapid expansion of railroads and mining operations. The lessons learned in Silver City became a model for protecting children across the frontier, with Sarah's school serving as a beacon of hope and redemption. The old mining office where Thompson had trained his young thieves was converted into a community center, managed by Mary Wilson and Catherine Thompson. The two women, once on opposite sides of the town's divide, worked together to ensure no child would ever again be forced into crime by poverty or manipulation. Their programs provided meals, clothing, and safe haven for any young person in need. As winter settled over Silver City, Sarah stood at her classroom window, watching snow dust the newly completed railroad station. Her students, once forced to prey upon travelers, now greeted incoming trains with honest offers of assistance and genuine frontier hospitality. The town had transformed from a den of corruption into a community where education and opportunity flourished, proving that even the darkest chapters could lead to redemption through courage, compassion, and unwavering determination. Spring brought new life to Silver City, not just in the blooming wildflowers that dotted the mountain slopes, but in the expanding horizons of its youngest citizens. Sarah's students had progressed remarkably, with many now reading at levels that would rival children in established Eastern schools. The transformation went beyond academics. Their postures had straightened, their eyes bright with curiosity rather than the wary calculation of their pickpocket days. The railroad's influence continued to grow, bringing regular shipments of books, supplies, and most importantly, new families seeking opportunities in the revitalized mountain town. Among them was William, a young engineer who saw potential not just in the silver mines, but in the children's natural aptitude for mathematics and mechanics. He began offering additional lessons after school, teaching the older students about steam engines and railroad operations. Catherine Thompson, seeking to further atone for her late husband's misdeeds, established a scholarship fund using her portion of the recovered stolen goods. The fund would ensure that promising students could continue their education beyond Silver City, perhaps even attend universities back east. The first recipient was Jake, once the leader of Thompson's Young Thieves, now dreaming of becoming a lawyer to protect children's rights. Mary Wilson expanded the community center's reach, coordinating with similar institutions in Tombstone and Fort Worth. Her network helped identify and rescue other children being exploited across the territory. The success of Silver City's reformation had become a model for other frontier settlements, proving that education and opportunity were more powerful tools for progress than force and corruption. Sarah's reputation grew beyond the town's boundaries. Educators from as far as Abilene sought her guidance in establishing their own programs for disadvantaged youth. She documented her methods and experiences, her writings circulating through teachers' colleges, and inspiring a new generation of frontier educators to see potential where others saw only problems. The mining office turned community center now housed a growing library, its shelves filled not just with books but with student artwork and scientific specimens collected during nature studies. The children who once picked pockets now picked interesting rocks, cataloging mineral samples and learning the geology that had made their town prosperous. As summer approached, Sarah organized the school's first graduation ceremony. Standing before the assembled townspeople, she watched with pride as her students demonstrated their knowledge. Emma, once so shy she could barely speak, now confidently presented her research on local flora. Thomas, formerly known for his quick hands in theft, displayed intricate mechanical drawings of the railroad steam engines. The ceremony concluded with an unexpected announcement. The town council, led by James, had voted to establish Silver City's first high school. The building would rise on the very spot where Thompson had once gathered his young criminals, a physical testament to the power of transformation. Sarah was unanimously chosen as its first principal, though she insisted on continuing to teach at least one class herself. The mountain winds carried change through the canyons, whistling past mine shafts that now operated legally and safely, thanks to reforms championed by the community's newly educated young leaders. The railroad tracks gleamed in the sun, carrying not just silver ore but the dreams and achievements of Silver City's children to points beyond the horizon. As twilight painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Sarah sat at her desk planning the next term's lessons. A stack of letters from former students attending schools in distant cities reminded her that education, like the railroad tracks stretching across the frontier, could bridge any distance and overcome any obstacle. Silver City had become more than just another stop on the line. It was a testament to the transformative power of knowledge, compassion, and unwavering hope in the face of adversity. The town's story had become legend along the frontier, whispered around campfires and printed in newspapers, how a determined schoolteacher had turned a den of young thieves into a beacon of learning, and how the children themselves had become the architects of their own redemption. As night fell over the peaceful streets, the soft glow of lanterns in study rooms replaced the old shadows where pickpockets once lurked, illuminating the path toward a brighter future for all who dared to dream and learn.